Welcome, everyone. This is Tankie Therapy, I think number 24, not that that matters. We are here with Alex, Joe, Louis, Mikey, and Nora. We are at day 364 of the Gaza genocide. Is it October 8th? I guess it starts on the 7th. Like, how do we mark this? But it's been a year. It's been a year, and maybe I'll put this out tomorrow. It doesn't really matter when I put it out because it doesn't change anything in terms of, doesn't make a difference in terms of, how we read these events. It's been a year of genocide. That's it. And in fact, the genocide is expanding actively as we speak. It's expanding to Lebanon. There was a considerable, war crime act against Yemen. The Israelis bombed the fuel facilities and port once again. So these we got a lot of things going on, and of course the assassination of Syed Hassan Nasrallah. A lot happened in the last few weeks. We haven't done an episode, so Justin's not here. We usually do around the horn to open. We can still do that, or we could just cover one event each. I don't know. We didn't really plan this. Maybe I should have, or we could just do the around the horn. What do you guys think?
Stick to what we know, I think.
Alex, how are you?
Hey, how am I? It's been quite the year. I'm angry. I'm really angry. I think today, we've talked about this a bunch, but today I feel a lot of rage. I feel a lot of rage at a lot of cowardice that we continue to witness in the entrails of the belly of the beast here in the United States. I kept thinking about how after a year of horrific genocide and tens of thousands of Palestinian children killed, The Guardian is still publishing op-eds about charging Israel with infanticide is some sort of anti-Semitic blood libel. I'm thinking about this fabulous Black sociologist scholar at Princeton Ruha Benjamin, who was just awarded a MacArthur, and her university was touting and celebrating her Genius Fellowship Award while they're investigating her for her Palestine solidarity work and for her speeches and for her public advocacy, which is someone online said if there was, I can't remember who tweeted it, but someone said, if this is the state of U.S. higher ed in one tweet, this is it. And it's a description of Princeton touting Professor Benjamin's work while also investigating her for Palestine solidarity. It's just like, I'm just really angry. I'm really, really angry at the level of cowardice. I think, the hope that I see within the U.S. is obviously at the bottom in the streets with people who are bravely advocating for Palestine, for Palestinian liberation, for freedom, for the end of genocide. But at the top, it's just we see more and more closing of ranks after a year. They are really solidified, whether it's in the media, whether it's in higher education, whether it's in the political system. We had this horrific vice presidential debate last week where the Democratic vice presidential candidate said something like kind of let it out, right? Where he said that Israel needs to expand, like something to that effect.
But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there.
So I'm just stewing in a lot of rage, man. Like the things we've seen just in the last 24 hours with the artillery shelling and the bombing of central and northern Gaza, the killing of the horrific murder of another Palestinian journalist, like reading the descriptions of what happened to him. I'm really, really angry to see that the West, but especially here where I live in the United States, you see so much cover for this Judge Holden ethno-state that is expanding its genocidal violence, and yet is still getting so much protection, so much weaponry, so much money, so much green lighting of their colonial expansion. And I think one of the really telling moments, I think, within like kind of U.S. mainstream discourse the last week or so was when Ta-Nehisi Coates went on the CBS Morning Show and he got questioned by that just absolute idiot, right? And from the beginning, it was just...
Hashi, I want to dive into the Israel-Palestine section of the book. It's the largest section of the book. And I have to say, when I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist?
Well, I would say the perspective that you just outlined, there is no shortage of that perspective in American media. That's the first thing I would say. I am most concerned always with those who don't have a voice, with those who don't have the ability to talk. I have asked repeatedly in my interviews whether there is a single network, mainstream organization in America with a Palestinian-American bureau chief or correspondent who actually has a voice to articulate their part of the world. I've been a reporter for 20 years. The reporters of those who believe more sympathetically about Israel and its right to exist don't have a problem getting their voice out. But what I saw in Palestine, what I saw on the West Bank, what I saw in Haifa in Israel, what I saw in the South Hebron Hills, those were the stories that I have not heard. And those were the stories that I was most occupied with. I wrote a 260-page book. It is not a treatise on the entirety of the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
But if you were to read this book, you would be left wondering, why does any of Israel exist? What a horrific place, committing horrific acts on a...
It was one of the most aggressively hostile interviews I've seen in like a normie morning news show. I mean, these are the type of news shows that have like presidents on and vice presidents, and the questioning is never ever that direct or that critical. But as soon as this guy, Tony Dickpill or whatever his name is, he started saying like, hey, you wrote an extremist handbook, like that would be in the backpacks of an extremist. When all Coates is doing is he took a trip to the West Bank. He saw what he describes as apartheid. He said, this looks like what Jim Crow existed like in the United States. And for him, it's it's very clear, right? It's like they're in the face of calls for bullshit, nuance and complexity and contradiction. Coates was really effective at saying, look, you're either against apartheid or you're for it. And we can add a bunch of stuff to that. You're either pro-genocide or you're anti-genocide. You're pro-colonial settler colonialism, you're anti-settler colonialism. But to see this little weasel kind of question him and launch these attacks on like this writer I think he's a really good writer, but he's politically, he's that's another issue. But he's kind of like this, he's like a darling, right, of the U.S. literary establishment. And because he had he
was a darling. Excuse me, he was.
Yes, Tony Dickpill ruined his career now. But it was just like, that's it. Like, I think in many ways, like that interview encapsulates a lot of what has gone on, at least in the United States for the past year, for people who even meekly try to speak out against a horrific genocide. That's what happens to them, right? Like that guy represents an entire, state apparatus that includes its media minions to continue to provide cover for a genocide that is only expanding. And I'm really mad. I think one of the first times I joined you guys, I mentioned that there's this amazing poem by a Guatemalan guerrilla poet by the name of Otto Rene Castillo, and it's called Apolitical Intellectuals. And I keep going back to that poem, right? Because at the very end, he writes, what did you do when the poor suffered, when tenderness and life burned out of them? Apolitical intellectuals of my sweet country, you will not be able to answer. A vulture of silence will eat your gut. Your own misery will pick at your soul, and you will be mute in your shame. And I cannot wait for these vultures of silence to eat the guts of all these cowards, these feckless cowards who continue to provide cover for a genocide. And they rarely say I'm pro-genocide. They will say I'm pro-nuance. And I'm done with that shit, man. I'm so angry. I've just been the last couple of days, I've been really angry on the one hand. On the other hand, to see that a year in, this resistance continues, that the liberation struggle continues, despite the horrific things that unspeakable things that I never thought I was going to witness in my own lifetime. And despite the impossibility of it, right? This liberation struggle continues, and that struggle is also expanding, right? And we've seen that in the last 2 weeks. So it's like it's just going back and forth, right? To keep in mind that the resistance continues, the liberation struggle continues, and it's a very clarifying situation to see again which side is the pro-liberation, anti-genocide side, and which side is the anti-liberation, pro-genocide side. And that's where I'm at a year in. Like, I can't believe we're still here to a certain extent. I can't believe we're still seeing decapitated children that were hit by not bombs, not artillery shells, but by snipers who are looking through their scopes to take out the head of a child. I can't believe we're still here. And I'm just raging, man. I'm just raging.
Thank you, Alex. Nora, what about you? How you doing?
Yeah, I echo everything that you said, Alex. It's this like constant vacillation for me of between absolutely like bottomless rage, which I've talked about every 2 weeks for the last year on this program, but also like incredible awe at the resistance. And I mean, just so much it just continues to happen. The assassination of Syed Hassan Nasrallah was devastating. And I think a lot of us were kind of processing that, for in various ways, and people in the region, the Lebanese people, on social media were kind of showing us how to grieve that, as people who are not from there. And that was incredibly helpful, I think, for me and a lot of, a lot of my friends and comrades, where this is, we're still like, we're in this, but in like this, kind of like a tertiary like platform watching it. And that for me is still incredibly unsettling, where, again, we're immersed in this 24/7, on these screens and through our phones, checking in with our people, thousands of miles away. But then we're also going about our lives here, and it's this constant cognitive dissonance that I'm still having a really hard time understanding and processing. But then there was the Iranian ballistic missile strikes, which were also like awe-inspiring to see, and the way that people in Gaza were celebrating. I mean, they could see them going over their head, going over the skies to the entity, and being able to witness that kind of joy and respect, that finally someone was doing something, after a year of this. That was, that kind of like swung me in the direction of like, it is possible. Like, we are seeing the end of this colony. We're seeing the end of Zionism. We're seeing the end of this tyranny and the just like revolting nature of the Israeli state, and how it represents itself, as a pet project of the West. And so in effect, it was like, we're also seeing the end of the West and the end of that imperial core structure. And so that was like, it was the first time in, I don't know, months when I felt like my back was straight, like I wasn't hunched over in this kind of like fetal position all day. And then we see the just the like obliteration of Beirut and the south of Lebanon. But again, then we see the heroic resistance of the Lebanese and Hezbollah, and how they're just liquidating these these monsters at the border. And then last night, I'm like texting a friend of mine in central Gaza, making sure that he's still alive, because just the absolute rampage that Israel is carrying out in the central Gaza Strip and in the north, where they're just massacred. They're going for it. They're really trying to liquidate everybody in northern Gaza. And so I'm trying to like hold on to many things at once. I'm trying to hold on to that, to that, the knowledge, like you said, Alex, of like knowing that this is the struggle of liberation, and it's no one ever thought it was going to be easy or bloodless or but we're witnessing it, and we have to remember that, and like taking the long view, and then like at the same time just crushing grief and anger, and this kind of, and we've talked about this a lot, where the like all these safeguards that we thought that were in place, like international law and the United Nations, and some semblance of like morals and ethics, and the laws of war, even that has been completely trampled this year, and we are entering a new phase of a world where laws don't exist when they are applied, when they are supposed to be applied to the imperial core and all of its satellites like Israel. And so what do we do with that? I'm also having a hard time with that. I don't know. I'm in this I kind of just feel like I'm in this like I have a beehive in my head at all times, where I'm just like bouncing back and forth between faith in the resistance, and also just immense grief and pain and disbelief. So yeah, I can't believe it's been a year. I can't believe it's it can get worse. It feels like it's getting worse. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of in a place. That's a lot.
Thank you, Nora. No, I agree with you. This is the closeness to all of this through screens. I mean, I've remarked on this a lot of times. It's something that we're in uncharted territories psychically. Like there won't be, I mean, maybe not. I mean, yeah, people can make the argument, but like, oh yeah, this is that we've seen other conflicts on our phones before, but I don't know. Not like this.
Yeah, not like this.
Louis, what about you? How you doing, man?
Gonna sound like a broken record, but massively appreciate and almost entirely agree and empathize with everything Alex and Nora said. Like Alex, I'm feeling a lot of rage, including because of some of the specifics that you mentioned, Alex. And yeah, Nora, the beehive thing in my head is, I haven't thought of it like that, but it's a good way of putting it. There's just this kind of, yeah, at all times, this furious thoughts and mixture of emotions. And yeah, like you said, it's a lot. I actually thought of you today, Sina, because obviously the anniversary is tomorrow. And I remember when we did the Kanafani episode for the anniversary his killing, we spoke a little bit about what even like why is an anniversary significant? In a sense, it's just an arbitrary measurement of time. But I remember I said during that conversation that personally I have found that anniversaries, for whatever reason, are significant, and for me are felt emotionally. Deaths, commemorations, whatever it is. And I've definitely been feeling the approach of the anniversary tomorrow, and feeling more disbelief, more anger, more emotion because of it, for whatever reason. And I also had a kind of flashback to probably around November last year, which is when I wrote, so the Ebb issue that the special issue that I put out, which even though it's published in January, I probably wrote the intro to it in about November. Like, it was only a few weeks into the genocide. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing myself. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said something like, whatever happens from this point, it's clear there's no going back to a status quo. That's now impossible. And this is really like cementing the end of one historical epoch and opening up of another. And, it doesn't matter that I'm not saying this to like, I'm so vindicated, but it's so clear now that this is October the 7th, 2023 is a historical watershed moment.
In world history, not just regional, not just it's centuries from now.
It's a 1492.
That analogy.
No, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's like Haitian Revolution scale act of decolonization.
Well, in a way, it's the beginning of the end of what's began in 1492, maybe. Anyway,
that's an interesting way of thinking about it.
So that's been on my mind because, and the reality is as well, we don't know exactly. We know it's momentous and we know it's epoch shifting, but beyond that, at this point, we don't know exactly what that looks like, obviously. And I think this kind of relates to the beehive analogy that Nora gave. It there's also, I've got such respect for people that are able to think and write and analyze lucidly at the moment, because I said this in the last group conversation we had. It's like you can't even process one thing that's happened because the next has already happened, or happens the next morning, or you're aware of it the next morning, and there's just seismic things happening all the time. I'm not even going to talk about it at length because I would end up speaking for an hour. The assassination of Said Nasrallah is seismic. And, I was talking to someone the other day, if you listen to Arabic language media, hearing a Shaheed, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the martyr, that's going to take a very, very, very long time to get used to. There's a part of my and millions of other people's brains that just does not compute somehow. And actually, another thing that Nora mentioned, which I massively felt, is the night of the Iran's strikes. So I'm in like regular communication with a lot of people in Gaza now, helping them in various ways with fundraising and transfers and stuff. And so many of them just messaged me kind of like almost euphoric messages and videos and pictures, which was very, very emotional to receive. And they were euphoric, and it was, like you said, Nora, it was someone is doing something for us. There is, it was major. It was a major, and I imagine, sadly, probably in some ways a temporary lift, but it was a huge psychological euphoric moment, and not just for people in Gaza, obviously. And I'm still, yeah, and but again, you don't even really get to process that because it's just on to the next. It's just, it's just absolutely relentless. I am, yeah, like I am feeling a lot of anger. I mean, I'm always feeling anger and rage, but I think more in much the way that Alex described. The stuff published by The Observer, which is The Guardian, essentially The Guardian on a Sunday today, is just absolutely, you're out of words. I don't even know how to describe the fucking debased. It's just, the most extreme being this Howard Jacobson opinion piece, which I don't even really want, and that's the other thing. You don't want to, it's so obscene. You don't even want to be dictated what you're talking and thinking about by them. And, I sometimes think, why are we fucking even why are we, and you've said this before, Sina, like, why are we allowing these fucking, evil people to dictate how we respond? And maybe we're getting too dragged down in that. But I think, in the case of The Guardian / The Observer, yes, a lot of people have woken up to it, but, far too few. And I think more insidious than that disgusting Howard Jacobson piece today was the editorial on the situation, which is framed as, concern for the Palestinians, but is basically a despicable, deeply disingenuous with every single line argument for total normalization of Israel in the region. Positively quotes the Jordanian traitor foreign minister saying, "Oh no, we want to guarantee Israel's security." Describes Iran as, oh my god, what is it? I tweeted it earlier, I've forgotten, like mad mullahs or something, literally like 1980s tropes. Like, actually said, it's not mad, it's worse. It's like mendicious mullahs or like malevolent mullahs or something. But it's all packaged as in, this is to stop the killing. So it's more insidious than something as obscene and obvious as Jacobson. And it's just absolutely enraging. But I suppose in amongst that kind of rage and, flittering around different thoughts, there is clarity on some things, or I have clarity rather. And one thing that is kind of in my mind a lot is being absolutely unapologetic and actively kind of propagating the notion, not even the notion, the fact that the Zionist colony is a temporary thing and it is going to end, and it should be talked about and conceptualized in those terms. And it's incumbent upon anyone who is in any position to try and normalize and spread that idea. Because obviously, like, that Observer op-ed today, what is absolutely unquestioned is the perpetual survival of Israel in that world. And that's largely what these things are trying to do. It's like, oh yes, this thing is terrible, but Israel's security has to be guaranteed, and and then it will continue. And I think there's many things that we can do. We, broadly defined in the imperial core, but I think one thing is really pushing, obviously, support for resistance, which, as I think Nora and Alex both said, it still continues. But beyond that, really, really pushing the idea that, Israel is a project. It's a project that's going to end. And yeah, we know that's not going to go easy, and it's not going to, it's going to be a continuation in many ways of what we're seeing now, but it is going to happen. And, I've said this, but I've said this probably more than once, but, as much as we feel these negative things, from afar, we are not fucking allowed to give in to despair, basically, or to, not in like a way that I want anyone to burn out or fucking collapse, but we just don't have that luxury. And I feel absolute clarity on that. And I don't want to have any fucking regrets about what I did or didn't do at this time. Which, and obviously that what you do and don't do is, that's a personal thing, and it depends on loads of different things, but everyone has to make their own decision on that. But yeah, thank you. I'm grateful for listening and being listened to, you guys. Yeah, and maybe we do another episode talking about these disgusting articles. Maybe we don't. I don't know.
Airing of the grievances. We need one. We could record tomorrow. There's going to be a whole bunch of them. We'll have no short. We should, yeah. The NLR interview. We forgot about that one. That's a good one. The NLR thing. Yeah, it's all. Thank you for that, Louis. That was really good. Joe, what about you? How you doing, bro? Joe, you're muted. Sorry, I muted you against your will.
Okay. All right. Sorry, dude. Yeah, the lowest point for me, I think, in the whole year was probably Nasrallah's assassination. It wasn't just Nasrallah's assassination. It was this horrific massacre of hundreds of people. There's a stat. I don't know if it's accurate, but they say they used more bunker buster bombs than the United States used in the whole of the Iraq occupation invasion. It was just. You run out of words, like Louis says. So that was the low point. Then the high, one of the.
Joe, can I stop you for a second? Can you check your mic? Sounds like you switched your mic. Maybe not. I don't know. You sound different. Okay, never mind. Sorry. Okay, I'll delete this.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the better points, or I don't know, was with the Iranian response to bombing of Israel, the second True Promise 2 one, because it was very. I mean, yeah, I think like everybody, we're all so down after Nasrallah was assassinated. It was like disorientating too. It was demoralizing, and the Iranian response was so huge for obviously for all of us. And so, yeah, with the year coming up, like Louis says, it is important. It is important. These anniversaries are important. So one thing I did, I just looked back and tried to think about where has their propaganda succeeded in the West and where has it failed. And it's surprising to me. I think it's somewhat surprising that to a large extent it has failed. There's a YouGov poll from July and other polls that are similar to this that show that majorities in Western Europe and in near majorities in the United States are basically totally disgusted with Israel. They're disgusted with it. That's not the message we get from our propaganda system and our political class, but that is what public opinion has taken. However, on the downside, majorities also go along with the demonization of armed resistance of Hezbollah, of Hamas. They don't see the heroism. They don't see the justice in it, because there's a concerted effort to just silence us, to silence anything, even the smallest voices. I mean, journalists are disappearing from YouTube. People are being arrested, being threatened with. Here in the West, they've lost confidence in their ability to propagandize. I think there's a palpable fear that all this discussed with Israel that we see in these polls could flip over into an appreciation and support for resistance, for armed resistance. And there's also, like, you could say this is discouraging, but I don't think it is. There's something like 15 to 28% support for a one-state solution, which is basically the worst nightmare of the Zionists, right? So now think about that. Even the 15%, even the low end of that, I mean, do we have a political party that advocates that? I mean, anywhere? No. I mean, we don't have media organizations that draw 15 to 28%. No. I mean, there's, in spite of how deliberately weak they've made us appear, there's this reservoir that we could potentially tap into. It I think is grounds for some optimism. And also, I think when you think about the propaganda, like, I know there's this absolutely the Jack Jacobson just filth that he published in the Guardian. But I think even more damaging, in my opinion, even more damaging is what Naomi Klein did, because what she's doing is she's trying to take that 15, 20% or 28% and draw them into basically uselessness, into this useless empathy, like, oh, we feel so bad. But we don't support armed resistance. We demonize it as well. We go right along with them, and we reinforce that message. And we just make sure that anyone who is curious, who is empathetic, who's willing to dig into this a bit, they get drawn into this totally useless uh, fake dissent that isn't really dissent. So I think she's even worse. I think she does more damage, and I think a lot of the articles in Jacobin are doing the same kind of thing. So I think maybe going forward, I know there's a tendency to want to dismiss those people and focus maybe more on the Jake tape tappers and those people, but I think it's a question of balance. You do have to respond to those people too, but I think maybe look more at going forward. Look more at the Naomi Kleins, at those people. I think myself, just telling even a note to myself, I think sometimes I've been a bit too dismissive of them and the damage they do. And when I look at these polls, I think going forward, that's one of the useful things we can do is really hammer these people and really expose how they reinforce this genocidal Western system. So that's kind of what I had on my mind.
Thank you, Joe. Mikey, close us out.
I agree with a lot of folks kind of talking about how this is highly reminiscent of the original kind of colonial genocides, right, of the Americas. And except we get to see it, like on our phones. And I think the genocide in Palestine and I guess now in Lebanon, it's kind of a very clear portal into a vision of how the West was won. And we're seeing kind of like the West fighting in the same way and using the same tactics or similar tactics to maintain a hold of it. I think in a certain sense, we're also seeing how the West was undone. Looking into the future, I think we'll look back on this as the beginning of the end of Western hegemony, particularly in West Asia. And I think it's actually perfectly captured, I think, in events today, where an incredibly courageous martyr wrestled a weapon out of the hands of an IDF soldier and managed to kill and wound quite a few IOF soldiers. But just the idea of the most moral army in the Middle East cowering in a McDonald's bathroom, I think is a perfect encapsulation of the fall of Israel and the West generally. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming days and weeks and months. When it comes to having kind of like this mess in our heads, I definitely feel that as well. Just kind of contending with the reality of living in this ongoing genocide that's now engaged on multiple fronts. Seeing that colonial violence in the most graphic ways possible, but also knowing that this is all hopefully leading to the end of Israel, the end of America, and the liberation of Palestine. It's two very big, heavy things to hold at the same time. So there's this sense of ping-ponging between joy, the biggest joy you could feel secondhand, witnessing people taking the work of liberation into their own hands and making the most ultimate sacrifices for a liberation that they'll never get to see in their lifetime, while at the same time having to hold just this tremendous, constant grief, witnessing people experiencing the worst you could possibly imagine happening to another human being. Like what happened to that reporter, that young reporter, 19 years old, Hassan Hamad, and seeing something that we should never become acclimated to, but is now a regular thing to witness, is seeing someone's entire life fit into a shoebox, you know? And knowing that that kid gave his life to show us what his people were going through. And I've tried in whatever paltry ways I can to find some way to emotionally connect with what I do and how I live my life with how people in Gaza live theirs. And I think the closest approximation I can get is to these reporters, you know. And you know, sometimes I find myself, I'm a filmmaker, but I'm also, you know, a sometimes independent reporter who sometimes find themselves on front lines. And you know, I've had that, a similar experience. I mean, however one can say similar in this context, but of, you know, being on Mauna Kea, on Hawaii Island, you know, 6,000 feet elevation where you can barely get signal, and you have something really important that you've captured, and you feel like this tremendous feeling, like the world needs to see this, right? And so you put your phone in the air and you walk all around and you try to find a signal so that you can broadcast that to the world, to show indigenous people, you know, fighting for their liberation. And just knowing that that kid probably spent, you know, some of his last hours just doing that. 19 years old, giving his life to tell that story. Like that's the closest I can get to relating to what they're going through. And my sense of relation doesn't, I mean, it's like 1,000th, right, of what they go through every day. And just to know that they're going through that still, it breaks my heart. But every time I get into a dark place, I know that this has to be leading towards something big, tremendous, world historic, that will never justify any of these, at this point, over 100,000 deaths, but it will all have been worth it. And I think we're going to look back on this with more joy than grief.
Thank you, Mikey. My first thought as you were speaking, I was thinking about all of these, you know, numbering in the hundreds, Palestinian journalists who have been martyred. And I'm thinking of all the sort of professional and organizational infrastructure dedicated to quote unquote celebrating press freedom and defending press freedom. None of these dozens and possibly hundreds of organizations will make a peep about this guy. They'll sit there quietly and perform their annual bullshit. They'll pat each other on the back for whatever mediocre horseshit plagiarism they put out. They give each other Pulitzer Awards for fake podcasts and continue on with their lives. And I've said this again. This moment in our history has shown us how fraudulent everything is about our society, how every corner, every sector, everything from education to workplace to our economy to our governance structures, everything that we call civil society, right? All, and in fact, even the vast archipelago of educational initiatives dedicated to studying genocide and human rights, all of these are bogus. These are all a Western set erected, and you can push them over. Like this is like a set for a movie in like the 1920s. It's very poorly constructed because you Palestinians collectively pushed it over on October 7th and proved it and said to them, oh yeah, what are you going to do? Are you going to, or do we get to count as you're human too? Do we count? Obviously, we know the answer to that. It's never been true. All of this apparatus was just for show. It's like, and so right now, when that apparatus should be kicking into high gear to fight against the genocide, they've been sitting mute and, in fact, fighting a rear action against anyone who questions them to the point where their institutions will take a permanent dive. Like, even though Colombia's enrollment numbers won't be affected, this violence that they're doing, this violence, like UCLA letting their kids get murdered, almost murdered in front of their students. I mean, yeah, they'll still be able to say, oh, we have the top number of applicants in any school in the US. Sure you will. But those people will know what the lives of their students are worth when the brass tacks, that it's more valuable to keep Zionist donors happy and let JDL Fash show up and possibly murder their little teenage Billy and teenage Susie from Canoga Park. Like they will allow that, right? Every single photo on their website of a hijabi and like a black kid smiling and laughing and eating at lunch, it's all horse shit. They hate these kids. They hate their students. And nothing means more to them than their stupid, precious donors' money. They get phone calls. I was speaking to a professor yesterday. Okay. I was speaking to a professor yesterday, and she told me that she was hosting an event and the president of the university called her. The president of the university. This is a big name university, guys. If I tell you the name of the school, you're like, wow. The president of Notre Dame. Oh, fuck. I said it. The president of Notre Dame called this professor to say, hello, professor of mine, lowly employee who's several rungs down the administrative ladder. I personally am reaching out to you to intimidate you in hoping that you will not pursue what is basically like a regular event that happen. Thousands of them happen every day in universities. In that university specifically, probably, where a speaker comes and gives a talk. No, but they are going to destroy their institutions, guys. They already are. So like this October 7th, we like what Palestinians did, Aqsa Flood, and the wider circle of consequences that have drawn this Zionist entity into an incredibly furious, like downward spiral. Like this is something that we will live with for the rest of our lives, not just in terms of like the memory, right? Because I believe that those of us watching this and listening to this and participating in this, we constitute a fellowship of people in the West who have what's called a moral fucking compass, who like actually pay attention to like the things of the world that like our own societies have helped directly manufacture. So we have a stake, and not just a stake, but like a duty to speak up, just as the liberals have told us since 1945 that, oh, never again, oh, you have to speak up, oh, don't be first they came for the communists and I stayed, like whatever, all that horse shit, right? Like we're doing it, and we represent a small fraction and we are a fringe section of our media class. So like while thousands of them in universities and academia and think tanks, all that horse shit, they're working assiduously to cover this up, to ignore it, to explain it away, to rationalize it, to frame it. Like there are a few of us who are talking about it in open terms, who are highlighting what happens, who are working in solidarity with the Palestinians over there, who are helping to get it out there. And yet, and that entire infrastructure will stay silent. And so if that isn't proof to you, once again, of how everything in this whole thing is just fake. It's just a fake thing. It's just like resource extraction, like finance, speculation, stock markets. That's like brass tacks of our society. And nothing means, and in fact, let's talk about the Canadian state for a second. Okay, the Canadian state has undergone a massive, like the Canadian as a country has undergone a massive racial transformation. Right. And this is to my point about how even white supremacy is less important to them than their precious stock market portfolios. Because what's happened in Canada is that you had a massive population drop at the beginning of COVID. So what they did is that they just pressed the on button to immigration and cheap labor, because it's more important to keep labor prices low than to keep white supremacy rolling. So they were willing to sacrifice like that sort of that action that like that you know, the fear that like the white Anglophone, you know, Canadian has of a South Asian person, which is like a truly like a deep genetically coded fear. Like this is an old school racism that goes back centuries. Like this is like the champagne of racism is British people and how they, and like Brit Anglos, like Anglo-Scot, whatever, Irish, and how they feel about South Asians. Like this is a pure form of racism, and you see it in Canadian streets, you see it in our politicians, you see it in daily interactions, just like old crufty boomers yelling at some like 20-year-old South Asian woman, get me my chicken, you know, like it's like this is Like this is symptom of a process that can't retain its own contradictions. On the one hand, they need lower prices, they need low labor to ensure that they can stay ahead of like the diminishing rate of profit. They need to extract more and more value from labor, so they bring this cheap labor in. But on the other hand, their racial supremacist project, settler colonial project, which is dedicated to moving a specific kind of European to the new world and reproducing their life and slowly suffocating the indigenous cultures and civilizations that lived here, that still live here. Like that project is less, that white supremacist aspect is less important to them than maintaining low labor prices. So that's like in Canada, there will have to be a correction for that at the level of federal politics, because this is also how our system works, is that we see things in the news and then we have our political parties feast upon them, turn it into culture war. People say, oh, fuck Trudeau, it's all Trudeau. And it's like this cyclical thing. But Palestinians on October 7th bypassed all of that farce. They bypassed our entire domestic political structure, and they forced all of the ruling classes in the entire West, all the corporations, all the universities, all the NGOs, they forced them to get into a line and say, oh yeah, go genuflect to your little Zionist precious colony. Go do it. Watch us. And we still won't, and like put all your fight forces in front of us and array them and destroy us. But you can't beat our project. You can't beat our liberation. You can't keep feeding this Zionist entity. Just last week, Canada Post said it's not going to deliver mail to the Zionist entity because of the situation, right? Israel, I mean, Louis, you said it right. Israel's temporary. And it's not just what is its temporariness, is that because we see the military end and their culture industry end and their PR end, we think of it as a real country. This is 2 cities. These are 2 major cities. Let's say 3. Let's just include Al-Quds, fine. Let's include it. But let's say 3 major population centers. Otherwise, they are a far-flung collection of colonial outposts and military bases. That's it. That's it. They have not rooted themselves in the land. Half of their people fly back and forth. I will never forget my nemesis at McMaster University. Avi, you little Dorcas Malorcas. How dedicated were you to the Zionist project? You live in New York now. I Googled you. You live in New York. You're a stock dude. You didn't give a shit about Israel. If you gave a shit, you'd go there. You'd be a brigadier general by now, probably. Okay? You don't give a shit. It is a hobby for you. When Zion, you can't do settler colonialism by hobby. You have to go and do it. And they have fewer and fewer people who are going to go do it. They have all kinds of mercenaries in Gaza. They are not like, they are doing Gulf style warfare where they are bombing from the sky, bombs supplied by the American and like Anglo like war machine delivered to them in an Uber. And then they bomb from the sky, and then they send in mercenary goons to do their dirty work. Sure, they have their own. The IDF exists. Sure, I'm not doubting that. But there is 2,000 Delta forces sent in the first weeks of this. 5 generals. I was just listening to a podcast with, and I knew about the Delta forces. I didn't know it was that big, right? And so like that was at the beginning of this, and now it's been a year of attrition warfare. They've lost billions in hardware, serious hardware that you just can't reproduce. They've lost their ability. Like Iran fired 180 missiles and drones at them. Most of them got through. Their entire basis of their foreign policy power projection, like their power projection is, we are this unstoppable force. You cannot this, and a few old Iranian pieces of like military equipment like got there, and it was nothing. And we watched the video of they go and they land, and like that entire basis. And I think if anything, and I hate predicting things because most of the time I'm wrong, but this Iranian attack that we just saw, it went to the core of their project, because it reminded them of what Hassan Nasrallah had already accomplished by October 8th, when he said, oh, we allow you to live here. We allow you the equanimity. We allow you the peace and the quiet. We allowed that. And if we decide to remove that permission, then you cannot live your life. You can't make your economy. You can't sell your stupid soda streams. You can't make your bullshit Apple TV shows, which are you made in the US anyways. Like this is as hard as it is to watch what we have watched, their desperation is on is on display in the forms of their power. The size of the mushroom cloud is all they have. Like the pictures of the mushroom clouds. That's their only weapon, not the mushroom clouds themselves. Of course, I don't mean that like literally, but I mean that figuratively in the sense that the bombs actually accomplish very little, right? It's just killing people in terms strategically, that is to say. But Israel can kill lots of people. It doesn't change the reality of their gas is exposed. Their political leaders are not many. Their entire institutions are open to Iranian attack. Hezbollah didn't even participate in the Iranian attack. Yemenis stayed quiet too. Imagine if they combined their forces and they sent even, let's say, 5 times the amount of missiles. What could that have done? It's all done. They have nothing. They have nothing. So as much as we stand, we sit and we like think about like, oh my god, this crime followed by this crime, is that's part of their strategic, that's part of their work, is to distract, is to make you lose the forest through the trees. And if that sounds like I'm being callous and I'm writing off the pain that Lebanese people are feeling, I don't intend to do that. That's not my intention. I don't want to minimize, obviously, what's happened in Gaza. What, 68% of the buildings destroyed or damaged? I mean, that's unfathomable for 2 million people. Like that's an unfathomable crime that will be written about centuries from now. And when Israel is just a little, it's a footnote. It's going to be a section in the library, like under failed states. Like that's where it will go. And we'll all be gone by then. Like we'll be dust, but like Palestine will live. Palestinians, the generation, the children of Yahya Sinwar, the descendants of Yahya Sinwar will cultivate olives in Palestine at that time. So I think Mikey is right, is that like this is the time for despairing is not, this is not, we don't despair here. We watch, we react, we have emotions, we go through them. That's natural, that's good. And we cry, it hurts to watch this stuff. But ultimately, we're smart enough to know that history is bigger than the individual events that are plotted in the everyday. That like that's not you can't you bomb if bombs determine the fate of history, like we would have nothing. Like there would be no history. There would just be a series of rubble. That would it. You just bomb your way forward. Anyways, that was a big long. I don't know what that was. Someone take the mic.
I think there's really something to be said about the power of resistance captured in images, and how, yeah, there's, like you said, Sina, there's no mushroom cloud that can even hold a candle to the images that we've seen, especially on October 7th, but basically every day after that, right? That particularly Al-Qassam has posted, but Hezbollah as well. Their media apparatus is incredible. And I think, if we have any responsibility as cultural workers, media workers, online, tomorrow especially, I think it would be to try to wrest hold of the narrative from the Zionists who have media platforms by openly celebrating those images, commemorating them, where others will try to cast this kind of perverse, ghoulish glow over them, right? And I think that's kind of part of what made October 7th, Al-Aqsa Flood, such a point of no return. I think for a lot of otherwise politically unengaged people, an entire generation of people, is there's no way that you can spin those actions as a negative, as any reasonable person, even a highly indoctrinated Western individual. I think it's almost impossible, if you have a working heart and a working brain, to see those actions captured on video and photo and think, oh, those are the bad guys, because when you see like these resistance fighters like on paragliders and mopeds and tractors breaking through the barbed wire fence of their besieged homeland and seeing the sunrise on the other side of it. If you didn't know it before, you would realize it in that moment. Like, oh shit, Israel really is just a couple of company towns and man camps that serve as long-term housing for prison guards on the outskirts of a concentration camp, right? And there's no way to spin that out in any other direction. There's no way to recork that bottle. And I think people who have had unmediated access to the genocide and to the resistance actions, particularly young people, right? Particularly people under the age of 30, under the age of 20. Those are tens of millions of people who will never be able to unlearn what they've seen, what they've learned from those moments. And I want to go back to, that pivotal moment in one of the many recorded restaurant scenes in the lobby US, where one of those Zionist lobbyists was like, if we lose this young generation, that's the whole ball game, right? And so not only have they essentially lost on the actual home front and the ground war, they've lost the war for every succeeding generation's imaginations, and I think that's another critical component, especially in the small ways that we can support resistance efforts, is to continue to reinforce a very easily arguable narrative, which is that resistance good actually, and just to keep hammering that message over and over again on our platforms.
Exactly. I think there has been hesitation by a lot of people on the left to openly express celebration of the prison break that happened on October 7th. I think people are a little, there's still this very it's a very colonial instinct, I think, for people in the West to be skeptical of indigenous people resisting in the ways that they see fit against the settler colonial state apparatus. And I think even people who know better and who do understand why October 7th happened and the enormity of that action and the sheer brilliance of the paragliders and the bulldozer that crashed through the fence, and the older men who were suddenly walking around the land that they hadn't seen in 70 years. There's something, objectively, all of those events that happened in such a short amount of time were awe-inspiring. But I think because of Israel's reaction, because of Israel's, the Hannibal Directive, that people who don't, watch, read, or listen to, anti-colonial media may not even understand. I think that there's still a hesitation to openly celebrate or even offer respect to the fighters who broke out of prison on October 7th. And so I think I just want to thank you, Mikey, for reminding us that, along with the deluge of just nauseating liberal disgusting discourse that's going to happen tomorrow, we should be actively seeking out and reposting and creating our own, posts on social media that remind people that this was an anti-colonial action, that this was a historic event, that this was, the end of, like what Louis said, of what happened in 1492. That this is like a very extraordinary event in world history that we are both lucky enough to have witnessed and also unlucky enough because of all the grief that we've been feeling over the last year and all the things that we've been seeing that no one should ever have to see ever in their lifetimes, let alone experience firsthand. So yeah, I mean, I like, on the one hand, I'm like, looking forward to tomorrow, October 7th, in being able to, see again those images of the bulldozer crashing through the fence and the paragliders, and and I also want to just kind of tune out because the other side is going to be so hell-bent on trying to reinforce this fake narrative that Israel and the West have tried to force down our throats this entire year. And yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see who does what tomorrow.
Alex, what do you think?
I think, yeah, just to follow up on what Nora said, I think, Mikey, thank you for that reminder, because we're going to need it tomorrow to steel ourselves against the deluge of bullshit that we're going to be hit with. And I think back to October 7th and October 8th and just watching the news. And one reason I remember thinking this was an anti-colonial liberation move was by listening to the response to it, right? Like all the tropes and the narratives that were already in place to just be deployed. All this stuff that we now know was a lie, things that did not happen, but these made up descriptions of atrocities, it get in a way like revealed like their intention and their function, right? Like in a weird way, the fact that they were talking about that they're using old colonialist tropes against brown men, right? Like that exists in almost like a universal way, right? Each context has this particular like valences to it, but I don't know. Like I remember thinking, listening to some of these narratives, listening to that CNN reporter talking about beheaded babies, and I'm just thinking, like talking to my partner and saying, this stuff is like too perfect in the sense that it was going to be used to delegitimize what actually happened on October 7th. Like the fact that they had those narratives ready to go, the fact that these narratives really spoke to longer colonialist fantasies and depictions of anti-colonial violence, the fact that they're ready to deploy them immediately and then have them circulated on Western media. Like that was already like a hint that like, wait, no. I think our initial instinct was right. Well, our little group, right? They kind of revealed what actually happened by how they tried to misrepresent and frame within a prose of counterinsurgency that then would enable and facilitate another prose of genocide, right? Because we knew what was going to happen next. So I think Mikey's reminder is a really powerful one for us to help steel us for tomorrow, to help put up with, we still have very powerful people, the most powerful politicians in the United States, repeating some of the same counterinsurgent, pro-genocidal propaganda of things that we now know did not occur. And they're still repeating this, on very powerful platforms and debates, presidential debates, vice presidential debates. But in a way, that's almost an admission, right? I think if you can kind of, to use a word from Sina's world, his old world, to deconstruct, what these literary critics like to do, deconstruct and all that bullshit. Like the narrative that they deploy kind of like reveal, kind of give the game to a certain extent. We just have to be willing to kind of be patient, to deconstruct it, to have people listen to us, to have the patience to describe that these were old colonialist tropes, like the stuff that Nora and EI have been doing for a whole year, right? I mean, the thing is that we're facing a really powerful media apparatus and intellectual apparatus that there's real costs for people who try to do this kind of stuff, right? And we've seen that as well. But I think Mikey's reminder is a really powerful one for tomorrow, and then we can save, Louis. I don't see Louis now, but we can save some of the worst takes, and we can use that for a separate episode. But on my wall, I have 2 pieces of art. One by this comrade from DSA, Gerard, who it depicts a tank overgrown with weeds, and on top are Palestinians waving a Palestinian flag. And then another really wood print that this guy Adam produced, where it's a really this crazy, shocking wood print depiction of that bulldozer breaking walls, right? And in my personal life, walls and borders have fundamentally marked and shaped the beginning and the ongoing situation of my life. And for me, that bulldozer breaking down fucking walls and borders will always be a powerful symbol for me, just because of my own personal family and personal situation. Like that's just a crazy image that will continue to resonate with me. And that will also help steel me tomorrow as we get hit with all this stuff.
Joe, closing thoughts?
Oh yeah, I just totally agree with Mikey and Alex and Nora have said. It's very important to the propaganda system that we hate their enemies, that we share their hatred of their enemies. They don't care as much if you hate their Israel. Okay, you can hate Israel. I mean, they don't like it, but they can handle that. What they can't handle is you identifying with what they consider their enemies, with Hezbollah. If you identify with Iran, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with Russia. I said to a guy who was so outraged today on Twitter, I said, actually, the Holocaust thing, I was kind of on the fence, Russia's invasion, there were pros and cons, was it justified? So over the past year, this Holocaust in Gaza, I totally support their invasion. The West understands nothing but brute force. They will have to suffer major defeats to stop terrorizing the world. So I think that clarity is what we need. We need to not vilify, not hate who they tell us to hate. And so, yes, celebrate the armed resistance of October 7th. Absolutely, we need to do that.
I think of Salman Abu Sitta. He wrote an article possibly for EI or maybe Mondoweiss, one of the two. And I think of him, I think of all the intellectuals like hemming and hawing and NLR types who are like, oh, we can't call this genocide. Oh, we can't do this. And I think of Salman Abu Sitta, 80 years old, 90? Like 80 something in his possibly 90, mid 80s. Okay,
Yeah, I think he's in his
writes
mid-80s,
no
yeah.
fear. He says, "I would have been one of those people, paragliders, resistance fighters." He wrote that. That was the title of the piece. We have our radical Trotskyite vanguard can't even say the word genocide, and this guy in his mid 80s could be like, "Yeah, I would have been there. I wish I was young. I would have gone on those paragliders. I would have shahided myself." That's the difference between the West and indigenous people. That's the difference. You want to know, I'm not fetishizing. I mean, yes, I've been working with indigenous people for 5 years now in an intimate capacity, far more than I ever did in my life. To my own detriment, by the way. It took me way too long to discover all this amazing cultural and literary stuff that I could have dedicated myself to instead of fucking Charles Rimjob Dickens. Like, I could have dedicated myself to like cool, like Lakota literature, to like cool translation. I could have done all that. It was way too late. I apologize to my younger self for not knowing, or I don't know how that even works. But this is like what indigenous people show us is world history, how to fight world history, how to take on the evil, heartless, like demons of this planet. They aim their violence at indigenous people first and foremost. Okay? And that's because that project of settler colonialism goes to something deeper. Anyways, we're over an hour. Thank you guys. This was good. For those people who are religious who are listening to this, I'm asking you to pray for our comrades in Palestine, for our comrades in Lebanon, for the resistance. Keep them in your thoughts, in your prayers. We are going to be as we've all said, and I'll just repeat, tomorrow we will be in like deluged with fabrications about the heroism of October 7th, and you will be instructed to not say anything good. You will be told by your professors, by your elders, by your employees, by your superiors, like, oh, don't say that. Don't commit thought crime. Thought crime is bad. And just don't ever listen to them. They do genocide in the open. You have no moral duty to make them happy. Okay, say what's on your mind. I mean, I know it's easy for me. I have complete freedom in my professional life. I get it, but this world doesn't deserve our lip biting anymore. It doesn't deserve it. If Zionists get to be bloodthirsty freaks in the open and celebrate genocidal race hate, then you can celebrate the paraglider left. Okay, Adam Shits. Anyways, go fuck yourself, Adam Shits. Bye, guys. This was fun. Justin, love you too, Nora.
I love you guys.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
It's been a year. We'll stay here forever. Tankie Therapy is going to be around. We will have our brains melting out of our ears, and it will be live for you. We stand with Palestine. Thanks, guys.
Hell yeah. Yeah, one more thing. We don't necessarily always have to deconstruct, contextualize, historicize, right? We don't always have to engage with these idiots who are going to try to put out treatises of why we can't support resistance or why there's nuance, right? This is not the time of nuance. It's the time of fucking monsters. So don't engage with the monsters. Just crush them and celebrate the resistance. And not to pat my own back or anything, but there is a helpful tool you can use to disengage quickly and dismiss the idiots in your timeline. So
A very useful
feel free to
tool,
use it.
Mikey.
I'm going to
A
use it
very
as a
useful
title.
tool.
I ain't reading that Free Palestine. That's the title. It will be live for you. We stand with Palestine. Thanks, guys.
Hell yeah. Yeah, one more thing. We don't necessarily always have to deconstruct, contextualize, historicize, right? We don't always have to engage with these idiots who are going to try to put out treatises of why we can't support resistance or why there's nuance, right? This is not the time of nuance. It's the time of fucking monsters. So don't engage with the monsters. Just crush them and celebrate the resistance. And not to pat my own back or anything, but there is a helpful tool you can use to disengage quickly and dismiss the idiots in your timeline. So
A very
feel
useful
free to
tool,
use it.
Mikey.
I'm going to use it
very
as a
useful
title.
tool.
I ain't reading that Free Palestine. That's the title.
Incredible.
Oh, yeah, that's the
Cultural
theme
intervention
of
of the year.
our airing of the grievances. I ain't reading all that. Free Palestine. So, that'll be the name of this title. Thank you, Mikey.
right.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Alex. Thank you,
Thank you,
Louis.
guys.
Louis had to go. He asked me to pass on his apologies for leaving. Take care, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.